1970 to 2010, that piece, 1970 piece, that was one of the first pieces I made when I got out of grad school. I went to Indiana University. I'm going to start here. See, I'm wandering already. Okay. My higher education in art took place in the 60s. I did my undergraduate work at Skidmore College, where I was fortunate to study with jeweler Earl Pardon. And I have a twin sister, and my dad at the outset, when we were getting ready to go to school, he said, okay, it's got to be in New York State, because I had a Regents scholarship, and so, we had to use that. And I'm only driving to one school. So it turned out that Skidmore had a really great art program, and, they had a lot of courses. I didn't know Earl Pardon or anything, and it had a great program for my sister, because she was getting on a baccalaureate in nursing. So that's how I ended up at Skidmore. And it was a lucky thing, because he was there, and he was a great mentor to me during those early years. His classes were my first exposure to working with metal. I only got into the metals class because I couldn't get into some other class. It was closed out, and I thought, I could take metals. I never worked in it before. And instantly it just clicked with me. In my senior year, and this was at Earl's suggestion, I applied for a Fulbright grant to Denmark. And I was fortunate enough to receive it. Glenda Aronson, who some of you may know, she was my big sister when I was at Skidmore. So she was, I don't know if she was 1 year ahead or 2 years ahead, and she also was a jeweler, and she also did the same going to Copenhagen thing. And before that, Arlene had done it. So there's a kind of string of us women that went to Copenhagen after we, to study in the same place. This was the heyday of Scandinavian design. Sleek, polished silver forms with little ornamentation. This characteristic style was seen in the work of Sigrid Pearson in Sweden and John Pripp in the U.S. In 1967, I began graduate study with Alma Eichermann at Indiana University. Her IU program emphasized strong design, three-dimensional form, and metal manipulation, an approach that remains an obvious influence in my work today. So this is I graduated from IU in '69, and this is the work that was in the next 10 years. And they are reflective of that Scandinavian influence. I mean, that's what was going on. This really sleek surfaces. IU was kind of different in that we often explored the surfaces in terms of doing different kinds of textural things on it, but that was not the mainstream. So these are some of the pieces that I did. Under Alma, I really developed my three-dimensional sense. And you can see that in my work today. And I always work three-dimensionally, even if I'm working just on a brooch form. And it's really easy to translate that part into bigger objects, which I did. So these are some of these. They're silver. I did a series of bracelet forms because they encompass a space already, just in the format. And I liked working in that way, in that very sculptural way. During the 10 years following graduate school, I worked in both jewelry and vessel formats, exploring formal concerns of mass, space, and movement within a constructivist form. My primary material was sterling silver. My approach was additive, building up the structure through soldered fabrication of smaller parts that were individually formed. And I still work that way today. They may be big pieces, but they're made part by part. There was an obvious coolness to my work, and during this 1970 to 80 period, created by the precision of the surfaces and the color of the silver. I became increasingly dissatisfied with this visual and emotional distance, as well as the time-consuming processes used to create the work. I liked the piece in the end, but I did not enjoy making it. It was very time-consuming, and I think eventually that hits you. You find the place where you start to be more comfortable in making the work. In 1978, I got an NEA grant and decided to use it to make taller pieces. This is a decanter about 12 inches tall. I had then moved to San Diego, And Arlene Fish was there. It was primarily a jewelry program, and I was brought in to do object work and non-wearable things. And so these pieces were some of the first that I did when I came there. And again, a lot of people associate me with raising. They think I raise a lot. I teach it, but I don't use it in my own work. I practice it on other people's pieces, but so these are not raised. It's all fabricated work. But still, there's still this very sleek surface to it. In 1980, a British jeweler, Edward DeLarge, introduced Americans to titanium and the powerful potential of refractory metals. The use of this new-to-jewelry material allowed me to incorporate threads of color into my work. And fortunately, there was an aerospace scrapyard in San Diego where I could buy it cheaply. That was a great resource. In 1981, I began a series of titanium and silver brooches about 3 inches to 7 inches in scale, approaching them as small sketches and trying to keep a feeling of animated gesture while making a stable construction that could be worn. So these are some of these pieces. In the corner there, you see this corrugated titanium, which I got at the scrapyard, and I was in a group, Allied Craftsman Group of San Diego, and they got a commission or something to make Christmas ornaments for these Christmas trees at Bullock's. And everybody was supposed to do it. So I thought, well, I'm not going to make my normal work because that would take too long. So I got involved with the titanium through that. And, it was a big change for me, cutting it with scissors. You could staple it, you could punch it, not things that I normally did to metals. So it was kind of a breakthrough there. But then I did this kind of architectural series of bracelets, brooches. I had some part of the series which I called the knitting needle group because the pieces were kind of straight, and I looked at them like sketches. I wanted people to see them and think that the parts were not necessarily attached to each other. And this was my first beginnings of really trying to relate to the environment I lived in. I lived in Southern California. It's, an extremely exotic place. You don't have to go to the desert to find the exoticness of it. And strangely enough, there's a lot of color in it, which I think you don't necessarily assume, but it is. And there were houses in the neighborhood that had front lawns that were completely fuchsia because they were filled with ice plant, and it was pretty stunning. So that titanium gave me a way to have that creep into my work. And I went on sabbatical in 1982, and I was pregnant at the time and had my child in England. And then I came back, and I just wanted to be done with jewelry. I had finished with that, at least for the moment, and I started doing these pieces that were really heavily influenced by the desert. And I would do a lot of photography, and then just kind of compile that information, that visual information, into some pieces. This was actually the first piece I did. And they were big. This one was about 2 feet across. And it was layered metal. It's all pattern work. I made some rules for myself. No soldering. I was doing these at home, and I wanted them to be big, and I didn't have enough firepower at home to do that. So I decided that everything was going to be cold connected. And it was interesting. As I said, I had my son, and so I couldn't be taking off in the evening to go and work at school. So the riveting that limitation was made for practical purposes, but the idea that they were layered forms really coincided much more with my resource material, which was plant life, than anything else. So it worked out really nicely, and I was able to, I worked these in groups, and as I said, it's all pattern work. And no forming except hand forming with my hands. I said I could use a mallet, that was all. But I got involved with patination because when I was in England, Michael Rowe published his book on patination, and one of the exciting things about patination is that it's never the same twice. And the variation within any range is huge. So you have to have some reasonable kind of surface to show it on. I mean, it's hard to show it in, 1 inch square. So, these are all copper and brass pieces. I don't actually like so much to color in copper and brass. So it was a nice coincidence that his book came out and I became interested in doing this work. I started etching the surface. I started patinating it in a variety of ways that were based on his book. And then I got involved using other kinds of colorants on it, like these are oil pastels on this piece. When I started, I would have just kind of loose sketches of what I wanted. I'm not likely to make a very precise drawing and then copy that drawing. I like to leave some space in it because the drawing is 2D anyway. So it's going to be different and I want to leave that option open. So these were start from some shapes, some gestural idea, and then the details would work themselves out in the beginning. I was doing a lot of surface experimentation at the time, and that can be very intriguing, but the hardest thing is to match any kind of surface experimentation with a form. And I found that I wanted to make the forms more simple overall so that I could explore that variation in the surface. So I started to work with a spinner in town. There was only one spinner in town, company. They spun precision racing rims. And I went there and just told them what I wanted these forms. I had just kind of simple cone forms. I wanted them to be seamless, but I didn't want to do it. I mean, I wanted to do it after a certain point, but I didn't want to spend 2 days getting a 22-inch disc this far off the ground. I wanted somebody to do that for me, and then I would take it the rest of the way and do the variation. So they were really nice. They said, sure, we'll do that. I think they were bored just spinning these rims all the time. And so he gave me a great deal. So he would spin the forms and to a certain point, and then I would take them home and just rework the whole thing and go on from there. And I got involved with spray etching because one of the things that those other pieces had was a lot of solidity to the surface. And if you start to work with surface, and I was working with these photographs from the desert, a lot of things are, dead and dying and disintegrating. And I wanted that to get close to that. So I started doing a lot of spray etching with Linda Threadgill's great spray etcher design. And just started doing really simple things and trying to develop these patterns that look, the sense that look very ethereal, working with the shadow. And being metal, it was an interesting contrast. People often thought they were very fragile, but in fact they weren't because they were made out of metal. And because of the strength of the metal, I was able to do it. And there was another series going at the same time, still a circle, but using those spun forms in a more architectural way. And I was building a house or remodeling a house on top of a hill at this time, doing a lot of work at school because my studio there was in upheaval, and looking at a lot of blueprints and doing a lot of designing and stuff. And as I said, we were on top of a hill. So these pieces with these kind of solid rims and projections were about that experience of redesigning that house and exploring that. The more I work, I find the looser I get with whatever I'm doing. That's the benefit of working really intensely or being able to work intensely, that you start to get not so precious about the work. So I started exploring other ways of coloring and got involved with the colored pencils because there's just a huge range, and you can sharpen the point really sharp, or you can leave it, fat, or however. And so this piece actually was etched inside. You can see that these little color bars are slightly raised, and then this is colored pencil on the inside. The white rim is actually copper covered with stay-bright solder and just flooded with it, and then ground back. Sometimes I file it back, sometimes I take a grinder and grind it. But it was a way to get that different tonal range. So I did a long series of these. Found out a lot of interesting things. The first one I ever did was, I envisioned this piece with holes in it. Lots and lots and lots of holes. And it's not in the slideshow. But it was just a big pain in the ass. Because to get that, if you're going to etch it, and I wanted them to be all different, you have to paint around the hole. And so it's really hard to get it to look spontaneous. And you have a tendency to, it comes out looking more the same. So I'm not doing that. So then I thought about lines, but I wanted them to be precise. So I thought, okay, I'm not going to paint this pattern on. I want to lay it on quickly. So I decided to use graphic tape. And I'd lay the graphic tape on different sizes, And I thought, I'm just going to do that, and then I'm going to scratch a little bit, and that will set the pattern. Because I didn't think the tape was going to be any kind of good resist. And I thought it would. And then I would take all the tape off, and then I would paint the lines. But at least the pattern would be registered. I would have the spontaneity. And then it turned out the tape was a great resist. So, and I was etching with ferric chloride, and it doesn't affect solder either. So those white spaces, that's solder. And a lot of people looked at these pieces and thought I had spent all this time soldering, thin strips of copper to the surface. And I just let them think that. You must think I'm crazier than I am. But anyway, these bows, these are about anywhere from 22 to 24 inches in diameter. I started doing double-walled pieces. This sense of one surface obscuring another surface, the etching eroding the solidness of the metal. There's some feeling of decomposition in these pieces, or disintegration. Some places are broken through. It was interesting because I think you're spray etching, because these are 3D forms, they don't etch evenly because the jets hit some places more than others. And so it's a challenge in the beginning to do it so that you don't lose a whole section. And then, so I would rotate it and watch it really, really carefully. And I got it so that it didn't, everything was the same. And of course you find out, that's not exciting. So then you start to try to pull back to that really fine line between where you're just starting to feel a little bit of anxiety about the thinness. That's what I wanted in that. Then I went to Australia. I had an opportunity to go to Western Australia, do a faculty exchange for 6 months. And I took my son, and I was going to teach at Curtin University, which I did, and the person there came and taught at San Diego State, replaced me. It's very easy to arrange. We exchange houses, cars, jobs, and pets. I think I got the better end of the deal because his small yard was totally outfitted with sprinklers, and my very, very large yard was the drag around the hole kind of thing. So, but anyway, it was a fantastic experience. I wanted to go to Western Australia because it's known as having the most, wildflowers in the world, and it's isolated. And I taught with Bronwyn Goss, she was an amazing person and a bushwalker too. So I had that experience. And so this is a little bit of the Australian countryside. When I went, I decided that I was not going to make work. I know people who, they go, okay, I'm going to go to this place, and then they book a show for themselves back in their home country the day after they arrive back from the thing. And I think, how do they do this? I didn't want that kind of pressure. So I said, I'm going to photograph, and I'm going to draw, and I'm going to teach, and I'm not going to make any work. And that lasted for about 3 months, and I got so filled up, I could hardly stand it. And so I started to work, and I made this jewelry. that was very different from the things I'd made before. All the surfaces really worked. That slip part was totally gone. I altered a lot of hammers to create these patterns. And there was this sense of preciousness about them, not in an expense way, but in a fine way. Very influenced by what I was seeing and what I was photographing. So these are all about 6 inches long. One of the things I thought about Western Australia was that it was going to be very intimidating, that the landscape would be very intimidating. And certainly the space is intimidating, but when you actually are in the bush, there's just this incredible variety there. So instead of being intimidated, I was really enticed by it, by all parts of it. There's a sense of fragility about this work. It is a very harsh climate, and a lot of that ability to survive was part of my thought process in doing this work. These are the kind of loose sketches I do when I do my work. So when I came home, I picked up the big work again, and I started doing these large repoussé bowls. This was one of the first ones. And got involved with the colored pencils. So the guy was spinning for me, and then I would come back and reform it and repoussé. I did this in a really simple way. I don't like complicated techniques. I would just throw a piece of leather over a blowhorn stake and put the piece on that, and then hammer it from the opposite side, so it pushed the inside forward. So you had the embossing on the inside. These are about 24 or 23 inches in diameter. I found that, as I progressed, I got better with the colored pencil. I got better at getting different kinds of nuances. These are the kind of sketches I was doing there during that time. I was trying to move my work forward through the sketching to do different kinds of forms. My drawing has always been very kind of gestural. Then I got an opportunity to do a piece for a corporation. They had asked a number of artists, and they had a certain size space, which was actually a shallow space, and I wanted to do it. But of course, these big 22-inch bowls were not going to work in that space. So I thought, I want to use this way of working, this repoussé, but I need to change the format because the repoussé is all done from the back side. So this is when I started to do pieces that were halves. And I did a number of pieces that were made out of 2 halves or 3 parts or whatever. This was the first one. And then those forms that were repoussé on the big bowls, they just, I'm a 3D person, I can't fight it, and I just wanted to take them up and stand them up. So all the things that existed on surface became 3-dimensional form on these pieces. And so this is all that Prismacolor pencil. And down here you'll see a little bit about how I do it. This is about 30 inches across. I do a lot of gardening myself. I'm in this exotic climate, and I'm affected by all of that. And I think, I would come to Seattle, and I love being in Seattle because it's so much about green. This was a piece, actually, that Mobilia Gallery they asked their artists to do a piece in homage to someone. And I'd always loved the bazaarware of Clarice Cliff. She's a British ceramist. So these colors are influenced by her, and also the gesture of the piece. I found that from looking at my photographs and there's really nothing that you can do that's going to be more exotic looking than what you could find in nature. And this is from the Huntington Gardens. And it influenced the tonality of this piece. This is the most recent one, and this was up at in San Francisco for a while. And this is the most recent piece of hollowware that I've done. The Ornamental Metals Museum asked some artists to pick a piece from their collection and do, they called it a remodel of it. And so you could look online, you could look through their collection. And I found this piece that's down here, this brown globe. It's by Tom Joyce. And it didn't have any details with it. It just said it was cast. And so I pictured something, cast in a Tom Joyce. And I knew he was doing big work, so I thought it was big. And it turned out it was actually only 8 inches. But I looked at that piece and I thought, oh, that's a piece I want to work with. Because I tried to grow these split rocks. They're actually African plants, and that's what the flowers. That's a split rock, and it splits, and then this thing comes out, and it's a pod, and it becomes this flower. And they're very tricky. They don't like water, and most people kill them by watering them too much. And so this thing just really reminded me of a split rock. So I decided to use that piece and develop my own kind of metal split rock. It was a fun project to do. This time I was, sometimes I just reach a point, it's the end of a series, it's the end of an interest, and I walk a lot and I photograph a lot, and I was taking all these photographs of dried plant life, living plant life, you name it, and I started altering them and playing with the tonality. It was in the summer, and it was the summer that Gore put out his Inconvenient Truth, and I'm sitting listening to NPR for endless hours, and it can get really depressing. And I don't know, things were melting in Alaska, and I think there were fires in San Diego, and I just kind of felt like life was not going to be the same at all. And I have the son who was then in his 20s, and you start thinking down the road, and you think, I'm sitting here waiting for the fire which is over the next hill to devour my house, and what's it going to be like? What's it going to be like? And I've been interested in botanical drawings and the people that did those botanical drawings. Some they have only the drawings, they don't really have much of the personal information about the person. But I had done a piece that was in homage to Margaret Mee, who was a British woman who started traveling in her 40s as a botanical illustrator of orchids in the Amazon. And she did the body of work on orchids in the Amazon. And I was really struck by her. She was amazing. And so I started thinking about, are these drawings going to be, are we only going to have drawings? Are we only going to have photographs? We're not going to have the real thing left anymore, because it's slowly being destroyed by everything we're doing wrong. So there's a kind of melancholy here about this work. Anyway, I would work with the photographs and isolate things and scan them and change them into patterns. And then I started to do this body of work, which I'm doing now. They're all brooches, and they're all silver, and I'm coloring them. They all reflect a shadow when they're presented, because they're presented away from the wall, so the shadow exists there, and then this fragment of what had been the real thing exists in its kind of color. So this paint that I'm using it's China paint. And you paint it on, and it's very resilient. You cook it, and It's really, and then I go back into it and kind of carve it. So this is the work that's coming out of that. And I kind of like that meditative aspect of piercing, so there's lots and lots of piercing, and then kind of playing with these parts, and then as always, whether it's this or whether it's the objects, it's always the color that's the hardest for me. It can really make the piece sing, or it can make it just moan. I moan when I look at it. But fortunately, both things, both the colored pencils and this, you can take off. So that happens a lot. But it's just a certain, with these it's a kind of violence. I don't want, they look kind of pretty, but I don't want them to look pretty. I want this slash on the surface. This is a recent one. They're about 6 inches or so. And this is the last body, I think. So that's it. Thank you. Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
With the color pencil, how do you seal it?
Yeah, it's just really, it's like a drawing. I sandblast the metal, so it's like starting with a piece of paper. It's just as intimidating as that blank piece of paper. And so the copper, they're all copper, is pink. And, then I just draw on it. Then people do this coloring in a different way. Marilyn De Silva does it differently than I do, but so I color the piece, then I dunk the whole thing in liver of sulfur, because the interior parts I can't get to anyway. And plus, you'll notice there's this texture on the outside, which is purposeful. And then I must add 2 or 3 more layers of colored pencil once I've dunked it. And then I just seal it with acrylic spray, matte spray, like you would a drawing. And people go, "Oh, is that durable?" I said, it's a lot more durable than a silver brooch, which I have to polish every month or something. So it's fine. The only thing that can hurt it is something abrading it. Like it rubs up against something rough or something. But that would be true of anything in metal. So. Anything else? Yeah.
How about the light fastness of the colors? I know Prismacolor has some issues with that. Do you pay much attention to?
I haven't run into that. No. Have you had that experience?
I've been drawing in colored pencil for about a year now, and the Colored Pencil Society, it's a big issue, and they're putting pressure on the companies to make them more light fast. And there's certain color ranges that are more fugitive than others.
Interesting.
All the pinks and purples are gone in no time, apparently. I haven't been around long enough to see it happen.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I haven't had that experience. But, then, I don't know. Maybe it's just where the pieces are put, not in bright light, or, I don't know. I haven't had that experience. Some of them, when I dip it in liver, some of them run a little bit. Like there's one color called Processed Red, and it runs. So I just kind of ignore it, but I don't use it, but others are pretty stable. Some people don't do the color the way I do it. Marilyn covers her piece with gesso first, and then she just, colors on the gesso. I did that once, and I didn't like it for my purposes. And then other people might oxidize the piece first and then color it. So the blacks would all be there, but for me that doesn't work. The color doesn't seem embedded to me then. So it's all these little nuances to it. Yeah?
Are you using a fairly thick gauge copper? Because if you put pressure on it, copper.
They're all 18 gauge. Most of the parts are 18 gauge. Some of the little parts, they're 20, but nothing's thinner than 20.
You have to support them when you, like, the three-dimensional parts, so that you can press down harder?
For what? With the pencil?
Using the Prismacolor.
Oh, no. I mean, 18 gauge is tough. Plus, I've plated it. After I construct the whole thing, I'll plate the whole thing to give it more stability. And the things that attract the plating are the things that are unlikely to be problematic, things that reach out. And you'll get more plating on the ends, which serves my purpose well in that way. And it also gives you a graduated edge. So instead of having just that 18 gauge edge all the way along, which can look kind of mechanical, I've got an edge that gradually, slightly increases. And it works with what the resource is, which is plants. So I'm lucky that I have that electroplating facility to use to do that. Yeah.
You talk electroforming or electroplating?
Well, I'm really plating because the metal's all there. It's a metal matrix.
You talked about, obviously, the botanicals as source material, but I was kind of curious when you first started, aside from the Scandinavian influences, where the formal genesis of that work was coming from, that early stuff. I mean, aside from this, the material and the polish and the flow, there's a real language there that's still in this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm wondering where that came from. Was it still plants back then?
Was it still what?
Plants? Was it still?
No, not at all. I was in Indiana. I wasn't interested in that kind of thing at all. And when I grew up, or when I was in Indiana, that part didn't really hit me until I was in Southern California. And I started to kind of own some space, and I was just really struck by the landscape. And this I was frightened of the desert at first. I don't like big hot places. They make me crazy. But when I started actually going out and photographing, you find things in all stages of growth and decay. It's a very harsh environment. And that really got me intrigued, how they emerge and then how they disintegrate. And I think I was going through some personal disintegration things at the time. So, it kind of, sometimes things that you've seen many times before, at this moment in time, they strike you and you connect to it. But I had no interest in it when I was, back in Indiana. Alma was, she was a very 3D person. Her work with 3D, that was part of her thing. That's where I learned to think that way. And as I said, we did some surface things. But that was not really what was going on at the time. So I don't know. I think it's it's like these 2 points, and they're out here, and then at one point they cross, and then it was meaningful. So that's where that thing started, and that hasn't gone away. And I come to Seattle, and I just want to move to Seattle. Yeah.
Your newest work, are you having those water jet cut, or because it looks so complicated, so you're selling them?
I like that part. And that's very interesting, because I showed them to some gallery, big time gallery, well, the person that I work with, and the first thing she said to me was, "Are you having those?" And I said, "No, I'm piercing them myself." And then she didn't say anything afterwards, and I wondered if she thought I was stupid or she was glad that I wasn't. But I like that part. It's like meditation time. And of course, then I can make these I might have this pattern that's on there that I've put on, but I have the option of changing it. And I just can't, I don't want to, I can't, I don't know what it is. I think I don't want to actually plot it out and send it out. And I don't know, I still want that X factor that's when you're in the moment cutting this thing. And I don't mind. Now, if I was doing something that was bigger than this, I might be doing that, but no, I caught it myself. Yes.
Were you influenced at all by the photography of Carl Velasco?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, very much so. Anybody else? Yeah.
You made a point in the middle of your presentation when you started working with applying colors from pencils and pastels and things that it got to a point where it wasn't so precious that you were sort of free to experiment. How can you tell when you get there? How can you get there quicker?
Well, I just know that when I work, the more intensely I work, the more I'm willing to take risks. It's based on that. So, if you're, and maybe it has to do with, it's the amount of work you can make. If you only have time to make 3 major pieces a year or something, then I feel like you're going to be pretty darn precious about them. You're going to want to make sure that, But if you're making a lot of work, then you just want to blast. You don't want to keep doing the same thing.
You find that those periods of immersion, imagine it's an intensity that you can't keep up all the time.
No, yes,
so
that's right.
Milk it when you have it.
Yeah. And, I taught all this time, too. So it was full-time teaching for 35 years. And so those times of that usually happened from December through January. That's when we had break, and in the summers. So, anybody else? And I have to say, since I mentioned talking, it's very stimulating to teach, I think. It's stimulating to work. I think the combination, for me, they worked each other. I mean, you're faced with these, grad students who like to challenge you at every moment. And I don't know, I find it, you're working with them and you're working outside your box because your job is to help facilitate them finding their way. So you have to kind of think with their eyes for a minute. Or, they take you out of your box. And that's really useful because you can get really tunnel visioned, I think. Just not having that prodding thing going on that students do. What do you think?
Absolutely.
And they say, I'm going to try this. And you think, oh. And then they go. And then they come and you go, wow, that's really great. Or they don't even tell you. They just bring it to you and you go, oh my God, that's great. And it's just, it's just like constant, input, really. Yeah. So I have to tribute my students a lot, too. There's one of them here, I think. There she is. And Barb would work, I'd come in one day and the next day I'd come in and there'd be a whole other body of work. I go, oh my God. So, anybody else? Well, thanks for your attentiveness. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.